My brain is messed up. How about yours? Throughout my life, I've often been rather, you know, frankly, very, very shocked at some of the things that my brain has produced and told my mouth to do or my body to do. And quickly realized that what's going on in here needs some adjustment. Welcome, everyone, to this is week 6 in a series promoting my new book, I Cubed. Unlock the inner strength behind your negative emotions, now officially coming out on January 21st of 2025. This week, I want to do go back to the mental model and do a quick review of the mental model. Our mental model is simply all the information we have in our brains that we have accumulated throughout life. Okay. So there's a database of information. Then there are formulas, and those formulas are the things by which we interpret each and every situation. What's my opinion on this situation? How big of a deal is it in the situation? So is it not a big deal or a big deal? The amount of emotional intensity involved, and what should be my response to the situation? So those are formulas, and those formulas come from the three things of DNA, life experiences, and choices. So the DNA being like, the way a guy thinks, so gender, as well as personality, that my response, the way I interpret things come from that. My life experiences, of course, and how I've observed the world. And then finally, my own personal choices. Every choice I make gets logged back in there and it gets added to the formula on how my mental model will suggest how I should respond the very next time. As I'm going through every situation, my mental model is saying, respond this way, say this, think of it this way. In that process, I am also looking at my micro and macro emotional goals. My macro goals, meaning what do I want to feel about this current situation? Do I want to get something to eat? Or do I feel like I need to say this to a client? To my macro emotional goals of all this is accumulating to my highest quality of life, which is divided into two categories. My standard of living, right? We're all trying to improve and maximize our standard of living, but also on the more theoretical, philosophical side, my standard of living, my quality of life is related to how well I live my values, okay? Which is integrity, how well we live our values. It's every moment, my mental model is trying to help me achieve those emotional goals, micro and macro. The issue is that in every situation, I don't have all the information I need in order to make, here's the key, the most effective choice. Okay. So that's what the end game is always to make the wisest, most effective choice, to interpret each situation in the most effective way, to respond to each situation in the most effective way. But if I don't have all the information, how can I possibly achieve that goal? I just have to work with what I have. And then secondly, in the formulas, right? So the formulas are absolutely goofy a lot of times because the way I think about things, right? And when my mental model says, here, respond this way, or here, say this, a lot of times it doesn't go well. A lot of times it does, right? So it's a process by which I know there is what my mental model is producing and telling me what I should say and how to respond. But then out here, objective truth is there's a most effective way to respond. There's a most intelligent way, a most wise way to interpret events. And that's the key. So we have the information, but also the formulas. But knowing that my mental model falls short in many ways, what does that make me do? It makes me stop and distrust my mental model. It makes me much more cautious. Now, what I see with people is that they are very emotional about situations, topics. And what that tells you is they are absolutely sure that their mental model is correct, right? So the more emotional people are, the more secure they are that what their mental model is suggesting to them, not only in how to interpret the situation, but how big of a deal it is, that how big of an offense they are. And there's no other way to look at it. The way I'm looking at it is correct. It's a matter of people responding to situations in very ineffective ways and honestly not getting it, not seeing it as it should be. So while we're going after our mental models, my point is to help clients pause and be suspicious, right? Be suspicious about what their mental model is producing and look at themselves objectively and say, first, I need to figure out, right? So we need to go inside and say, pause. I need to first figure out if I'm thinking about this correctly. And especially when it comes to the whole premise of the book, especially when I have negative emotions are the sign that we have to go inside and first figure that out first, because my mental model is not a lot of ways producing the most effective product. So that's where I came up with, namely the name of my business, which is Becoming More. It's a process of constantly becoming, like a participle, ongoing process of becoming more. I want to constantly grow, constantly improve, but moving in the direction towards the wisest, the most effective, the most emotionally intelligent. That's my goal. Everyone becomes what they want to. Only some people think about becoming more. And everyone becomes what they want to has to do with the want, and that key piece. Want is impulse. So a lot of us just passively accept what our mental models are telling us. And if we just passively accept that and just do what our mental model suggests, that's what we want to do, because that's what our mental model is suggesting. So it just becomes natural. That's what I want to do. Right. So if I want to hit the snooze button 7 times, well, I'm going to hit the snooze button 7 times. And if I want to eat this or drink that, if I want to respond in this way, then my mental model suggesting that, well, that if I don't stop and think, then that's what I want to do. So everyone becomes what they want to, right? Your product, who you are today, how you naturally respond to situations, to relatives, to family, to people at work is what you want to do. But some people stop and they think about becoming more. And that's the whole premise, that we have to not trust our mental models and then interrupt the entire process. Stop and always be suspicious of what your mental model is producing. And then secondly, try and figure out what the most effective way of responding. That's where I came up with the rational, healthy, wise, and right grid, right? RHWR, rational, healthy, wise, and right. Because there is a way that my mental model is suggesting that may not pass that grid. So I need to stop and align it to what's more rational, healthy, wise, and right. So to illustrate, in my book, I talk about, being born in China in 400 BC. So I came up with this, that, just trying to just step back and just observe the world and just kind of wonder, like, hey, that's interesting. Like when I watch movies about the samurai, or I watch, movies about years ago in Russia or South America, it doesn't matter. I'm like, that is so interesting. So I wonder if everything about me was the same, like my gender and my personality, right? So everything, like the DNA that I was born with, is the same. But how much different would I be if I was born in China in 400 BC? What would it look like if I was born and raised in China? Because how different would I be based upon the life experiences that I would have? And understanding that, I'd probably be very, very different. My point is that as I know that I would be very different, what am I looking for? Because when I watch movies, that, man, there was some wisdom in that country, like the Japanese, right? So the Japanese, and let's say the samurais, or the Chinese, and the way they live their lives, or people in Africa or Europe, there was obviously very, very wise ways of living that, I want to adopt that way of thinking. But also there were very foolish ways of thinking, like the Roman Empire. It became very debaucherous and immoral, just like America is becoming today. And by the way, that, every great empire ever has always fallen from within. And that's one of the reasons why, is because the decadence of the culture, because people are so spoiled, that just kind of implodes from within. And that's what's happening with our country. So I step back and then I look, and I'm trying to glean the wisdom and insight from all peoples and all cultures. That was my goal growing up. And I just came up with this years and years ago, of what would I be like if I was born in China in 400 BC. I'm just amazed at how so many people just sit in disdain and judgment and disgust of, like, Columbus or our forefathers, the early presidents. Like, how dare they? And they kind of joke about it and just, roll their eyes. And what blows me away is if these same people were born into those families, they would probably have the same philosophy and think the exact same thing that they did. Now, granted, I'm grateful that I did not grow up in a time where, if I would have owned slaves, if I would have born into a family in the South in the 1700s or 1800s, I'm grateful that I did not, participate in that. But I'm not going to be so arrogant as to think that if I would have grown up in that family, that I would be just as offended at slavery as I am today, because hindsight's 2020. And just the lack of critical thinking that people have, that at disgust of the forefathers, that, wait a minute, if you were born in that exact same time, Do you realize that you go right along with the culture? As a matter of fact, you're doing the very same thing today. You are just mindlessly going along with the culture because the culture is saying, hey, we need to disdain that. We need to change this or that. And it's like, are you critically thinking through any of this? The goal is to live in the most wise way and to be so emotional and judgmental of our forefathers, but yet knowing that if you grew up in that family, you would have done the exact same thing. That's what's shocking to me. You know, picture people 200 years from now, when they look back at this time and this culture, what do you think they're going to think of us? Do you think that we are the epitome of insight and wisdom and maturity and integrity? Are you kidding me? But yet, so many people who just are so self righteous are just mindlessly going along. But if they were born 400 years from now and looking back, they would have disdain for themselves. When it comes to stepping back in our own personal micro and macro goals, is to recognize, okay, what is the most rational, the most wise, the most healthy, the most right way to think and live? And whatever that is, gleaning principles and insights and wisdom and inserting it into information in my mind and the formulas, that's how you become more. That's how you solve so many of your negative emotions now, because you recognize that it's your mental model first that needs to be adjusted in order to live the highest quality of life. So, challenging mental models. We shall talk to you soon.